Hi, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. I don't know if I just want to share a little history in some ways about this event and what we're doing for these 2 days with Mejor Ciudad. Of course, first I want to thank everybody at Mejor Ciudad. It's an amazing organization, and we've been interacting for several months now about joint efforts that we can do at Harvard with the what we call Dr. Class, the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, of which, as you heard, I'm the faculty director of the committee focused on Mexico and Central America. We started a conversation with Mejor Ciudad back in, maybe it was in September, about holding an event at Harvard focused on housing in Mexico City, about the challenges of creating more affordable housing and dealing with the major urban problems here in Mexico City. We were very excited about bringing together experts from Mexico as well as Harvard at Harvard University. We were going to bring politicians. We had invitations out, tickets bought, auditorium booked, and then the earthquake hit on the 19th. Well, there was not only the 19th earthquake, a series of earthquakes, but the earthquake that hit Mexico City was about 1 week before the day that we had organized the panel. And everybody, of course, was thrown into a tailspin here in Mexico, but we at Harvard also were thrown into a tailspin because we didn't know whether we could continue, whether it was even ethical to have an event in Cambridge to talk about housing, to talk about Mexico City when people were still struggling to get back to their homes, and that we knew that the earthquake was going to be a fundamental watershed moment for rethinking the city and the building of Mexico City in the months and probably years to come. So as a consequence, I think rightly, Mejor Ciudad decided, okay, we're going to do an event in Mexico focused on the rebuilding of the city, and we're here with the benefits of that great decision. And so far I'm looking at the rest of the events, and the panels this morning have been fabulous. So I'm so excited to be here. Harvard is happy to be supporting and working with Mejor Ciudad, not just on this event, but thinking in the longer term about reconstruction and redevelopment in Mexico and Mexico City. This panel is focusing on transformation, and I'm really happy about that because we've heard a lot in the prior presentations about the nature of the earthquake and its physical and structural dynamics. Then the concept of resilience, Mary spoke about that. It came up in several of the earlier presentations, including from the Chief Resilience Officer. But I'd like to start our panel today by just laying on the table that sometimes, at least from my perspective, the concept of resilience is very problematic. It's not always really defined in a way that it's not a precise idea. It generates hope and makes you think about bouncing back and moving towards the future, but it doesn't really, within its kind of definition, articulate who or what is going to be resilient. And I'm interested in that concept. Some of you might know I wrote a piece about the 1985 earthquake. It came out in a book called The Resilient City. It came out about 14 years ago maybe. I think it came out it was after 9/11 in the United States. So we were kind of thinking about how cities recover from disasters. And I wrote an article or a chapter in that book about the resilience in Mexico City. It was called Reverberations after the 1985 earthquake. And one of the things that struck me was the fact that the government originally responded to the 1985 earthquake by just doing business as usual, the same thing that they'd always done, which meant nothing in many instances, showed that the government in its own way was resilient. In other words, it was doing the same old thing, bouncing back to its same activities. And in that sense, that resilience was not a good thing for Mexico. But what was good was the resilience of civil society to respond against the government. And so I think that the idea of thinking about resilience critically is important. What is resilient in a disaster, and who is resilient and who is not? Because we need to move forward, and we need to understand that there will be forces that will try to use this most recent earthquake to redo everything that they've always wanted to do anyway. And we want to make sure that the responses are to change things. And that gets me to this panel today. And that's why I'm very happy that we're talking about transformation. Because transformation is not the same as recovery, and it's not the same as reconstruction. It's thinking about long-term goals and aims. We need to be thinking, you all are thinking long-term, what is the city that you want to rebuild after this opportunity of a disaster? And how can we learn from other places who have had disruptions in the way that business as usual in building cities? What can we learn from them to move us forward? And I think that's what we're going to be hearing about today from our panelists. I think another thing that we'll be hearing a little about is moving beyond housing and the physical aspects of reconstruction, or I hope we'll hear. I'm going to throw some, I don't even know what your presentations are, but I'm going to throw out some ideas, and maybe we can come back to them later. But moving beyond housing to infrastructure, and not just physical infrastructure. We've heard about the fact that when you have an earthquake, it's not just housing is damaged, water systems are damaged, electricity, sewage. The physical infrastructure beyond the building itself. We tend to focus in disasters on the building because we've got the construction engineers. We have a lot of expertise in this. We have a phrase in English, when you're a hammer, everything is a nail. So already there are people that want to work on the building itself. Do you want to demolish it? Do you want to rebuild it? But I think we should be thinking about infrastructure more broadly, infrastructure that goes across scales in the city, because those infrastructure that are damaged in a place that's hit worse by the earthquake are connected to other infrastructures. But also, I'm hoping that in today's panel, we're going to hear a little more also about social infrastructure and legal infrastructure and political infrastructure, and not just physical infrastructure. So the question that I'd like our panelists to think about today as they present is, what kinds of institutions and individuals and communities can be involved in guiding the transformation of Mexico City? What kinds of skill sets or relationships or analytical frameworks or new or old technologies must be mobilized to start the transformation towards the city that we all aspire to here in Mexico? And I think it was on somebody's slide: just, sustainable, prosperous, and equitable. And where do you start on that kind of transformative process? Do you start with places, certain locations that have been damaged? Do you start with certain populations that have been damaged, certain kind of sectoral vulnerabilities, or certain relationships that you want to establish to start that transformative process, which will be, as we've heard already, a long-term process and a long-term commitment? But again, I want to put on the table that a disaster is an opportunity to actually change things systematically or systemically. That's a lot harder to do than rebuilding certain elements that are damaged, but it's a much more transformative process. So today, I'm not going to reintroduce every single person because you've been introduced, but I thought that what we can do is we will go, as you're listed by the program, we'll hear a little bit, maybe 10 to 15 minutes from each of our speakers, responding to those questions or whatever questions or whatever ideas they want to share about transformation. That means that we will begin with Ricardo de Becerra from the Comisión para la Reconstrucción, Recuperación y Transformación de CDMX. Then we'll move to Mary Camario from the University of California, Berkeley. And obviously, as you know from the lineup of this panel, we're talking about international experiences as well as Mexico City experiences, Chile as well as New Zealand, as well as what we know about Mexico City. Then, did I mention Derek Baxter from Wellington City Council, Roberto Mores, Planes y Proyectos Urbanos de la Universidad Católica de Chile, a lot to learn from Chile as well, and Tania, everybody knows Tania Muller Garcia, the Secretary of Medio Ambiente de la Ciudad de Mexico. So, Ricardo, we'll start
with you.